everyone. Good evening. My name is Miriam Naiman, and many of you may already be familiar with my name. Perhaps I've met you. Perhaps we've exchanged emails in the past. Perhaps some of you have even written to me in the past 2 weeks or more even. And gearing up for this webinar, which has been a lot of work by myself and Chana Zweiter. I haven't perhaps been able to answer your video. Here I am. Now you see who I am. But we are really very excited. This is the first time we're giving this webinar, and I'm happy to say so many of you have registered, really hungry for some very important information, enabling every member of your family to make Aliyah. I expect that over the next 10 minutes, more and more people are going to be signing in, but that's not going to delay us any longer. Since you've all registered on time, we would like to begin on time. I would just like to bring your attention first and foremost. You have two areas in which to type questions or comments. One is the Q&A and one is the chat. It would be best if you can please direct your questions to the Q&A, leaving the chat a place for my coworker and hostess for this evening, Sarah Cantor, to put up very important links as they're mentioned throughout the webinar. Some of them may be mentioned by name, others may just be resources that I've put together, such as a resource called Kol Zchut. Kol Zchut is a national platform of rights and benefits really for anything throughout the country. And they have very, very good translated articles, which list rights and benefits, which list resources, which is, it's just a helpful thing to know. So that's an example of what's going to be listed in the chat. So again, I ask you to put your questions in the Q&A. Questions will be answered most likely towards the end, although if it's something very specific to what Chana is discussing, I'm going to interrupt what Chana is saying. And ask your question. We're a lot of people, and I know that everybody is really interested in some of the very same information, such as the role of an evaluation and how recent an evaluation has to be. What if your child doesn't know any Hebrew, or what if your Hebrew is very weak to perhaps also not existent? And what about vocational and or residential programs or group housing and supervised group housing? I would say based on emails over the past 15 years and certainly, you know, years and years of Chana's experience, these are situations that are very individual and important to you, but we have really been able to have part in someone's Aliyah with the same sort of situation in the past. That's where Chana is going to share her experience. A note about Chana. Chana is a private special needs consultant. She actually does many, many more things, but for the purpose of our webinar tonight, Chana is a special ed consultant who we turn a lot to. She's not an NBN employee. She's an outside private consultant, and she's our guest for the evening. You've been sent the presentation. One of the slides on that presentation is a vocabulary sheet. Chana may mention different things, and I sent that vocabulary sheet because I thought that it would be helpful for you to be familiar with terms like Bituach Leumi, the National Insurance Institute, like Revacha, which is social services. So without further ado, I would like to again introduce Chana Zweiter, who is going to lead you through really A to Z information and process, getting you and your family one step closer to your dream of living in Israel. Thank you, Chana.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And I want to, I think that our primary goal tonight, well, tonight here, but today, wherever you are, whatever time it is, wherever you are, is that at the end of this presentation, at the end of this time together, that you go away with the feeling that we could do this. We can really do this. And the reason that we could do it is that we're going to empower you tonight with a lot of information, and you don't need to write down all the information. You don't need to know all the terminology, but you need to know that there is a process and there is a team. When I made Aliyah 29 years ago, some of you may know me as the founder of Yachad. You might know me through your years, your child, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister was in Yachad, and I founded Yachad. And when I made Aliyah 29 years ago, people came to me and said, tongue in cheek, a little bit, I think, that's not fair, Chana. You can make Aliyah. And some people said, we tried and it didn't work. And some people said that there are not very good services here. So I want to tell you that I promised them that I would help them. I promised them that I would help them. And that was before there was a Nefesh B'Nefesh. And when there was a Nefesh B'Nefesh, I hooked up with Nefesh B'Nefesh. But the good news is that there are many wonderful, wonderful services here for children, for people who have different kinds of special needs. There are people who have mental health needs. There are people who have on the developmental continuum, they have developmental delays. There are people who have physical disabilities. There are people who have on the autistic spectrum. And there are many, many good services here. And that's what we're here to share with you. How are we going to access these services? The way we're going to access is, first of all, that you have to know that you have a team here. You've been advocates for your child, for your family member all this time, and you're going to still be advocates. We need you to be a major part of this team, but we need you.
Anna, somebody's just asking if you could be closer to your microphone or perhaps raise your sound.
Sure. Okay. Tell me, is this better?
I think that's much better.
Okay, great. I'm glad that you pointed it out. Okay. Thank you very much for pointing it out. So the first thing that you need to know is that when you when you begin your process, you need to know two things: that there's a process and that there's a team. Now, you're the captains of the team. That doesn't mean that you carry all the responsibility, but we need you to help us lead the way, and because you know your family member the best. Okay, we need your family member the best. So you're the captains of the team. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you what your responsibilities are as the captain of this team. Okay, the other members of the team is Miriam and the other members of Nefesh B'Nefesh. Okay, they're very important. I'm an important part of the team. There are government agencies. Miriam already mentioned that there is the Revacha, that's the Social Services Agency. And there's Bituach Leumi, and they're the national insurance. They often complement with an E. That means they give services and funding for things that Revacha, and we're going to go into that in a few minutes. They're the private agencies, in other words, or the service agencies, better. They're the service agencies. That means just like some of you, let's say, have a child in OHEL, or some of you have a child, a son in a different kind of residential in the United States, then, or in Mexico, or wherever, or in Canada, wherever you're sitting today, there are different agencies. There are different agencies here too. And the good news about Israel is that not only are they very professional and very, have very high services, very high standards of services, but they also, you can have those agencies for, if you're Chiloni, if you're not religious, if you're religious, if you're Haredi, that they are services to meet different religious needs and different religious expressions, but there are also services that's very specialized in terms who they take. So that there's an organization, for example, called Alut, that specializes for people who are on the autistic spectrum. And within Alut, there are vocational services, there are recreational services, there are residential services, again, according to this, the functioning level of the individual. There is an organization, for example, and I'm not marketing anything, I'm just trying to help you understand. There's an organization called Elwin, which deals with people who have developmental disabilities. And they're born, or they're an arm, not an official arm, but they're based on work that was done in Elwin in Pennsylvania. And I have to say that even in the United States, maybe Elwin in the United States, that I have never seen such a high rate or a high level, that's the right word, that's the right English word, the high level of professionalism in terms of the work that and the vocational training and the residential facilities that they have for the people who are in their residences. And again, they're for people who are different parts of the continuum in terms of functioning levels. There are places for people like Aline, places for people who have physical disabilities. There's places for people who have mental illness. There's Netel and there's Anosh for people. So it is very, very specialized. You don't have to memorize all those names. You just have to know that they're available to you here. And Miriam and I are going to be the ones that are going to help you access that. You have to know that one of our partners and one of the team members is the Jewish Agency. And that's very important because when you file your file or at Nefesh B'Nefesh and you're going to have your son or daughter or a family member in that file, when you're going to go for your interview, it's very, very important that you that the Jewish Agency knows that you're coming with a member with special needs. They won't trip you, but they're firm. They're not gonna, sometimes the shlichim or the representatives of the Jewish Agency that sit wherever you are, don't always know what the rules are. They don't always know the laws. The truth of the matter is they sometimes change here, so quickly that we have to keep up on them. But keep up with them, but they don't always know. So sometimes they'll try to ask you, why are you going with this son or daughter who's on, who has so many problems and they don't have good services in Israel. So you just have to know that that comes from a place, they're just not knowledgeable of what actually happens here. But they need to know what they're going to need to know. You're going to have to come with evaluations, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. They need to know that you're coming and that you're in good hands and that you know what the process is, that the people at Nefesh B'Nefesh, the specialists are helping you, that Chana's writer is helping you. And I often write a letter to the Jewish Agency saying, I have worked with family X, and that family, we've already begun to look at residential and vocational services for that particular person. And when they land, they're going to begin the process. We know that they have to go to register in Misrad HaRevacha, the Social Services Agency. And we know within a year that they have to go to Bituach Leumi for national insurance. And we know a person who has emotional or mental illness has to go to B'riyut HaNefesh, which is an arm of the Kupat Cholim, of the medical system. So we know that, and that is assuring to the Jewish Agency. The Jewish Agency is going to pass that on to their arm, their partner here in Israel, their partner in the klita, in the absorption, and there's sometimes like a lot of connection. So they're going to pass that on here, and that person is going to look at it. Know and that your evaluations, and I'm going to get to what evaluations you need in a minute, but know that your evaluations need to be translated when they're here. But we're going to get to that soon, okay? That's your, okay, those are the different partners. Those are the different partners that are going to help you find the services that best meet your child's needs, okay? What I called you the captain of this team because you have to help us know what's best for your family member. You have to bring updated evaluations. Now, I have a list of evaluations, and sometimes they differ according to the function, not just the functioning level, but also the profile of the person. So what you need to know is that you need to come with an updated. Updated means about 6 months old. So let's say you're planning Aliyah, and please don't tell me you're planning on Aliyah this month or next month, okay? But let's say you're planning on Aliyah summer of 2021, okay? I would suggest that you begin you start soon to set the dates for your appointments, because we all know that particularly now in the period of Corona, it's very hard here to get appointments for evaluations. And I know that it's hard in the United States. There's no reason that you have to sweat it. Call your psychologist. Sometimes it could be done through the agency that's serving your child. And that also takes time to set it, and make that appointment for right after the Chagim, right after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right after that particular period would be a good time to have those evaluations, which means you need a physical, a psychiatrist or a neurologist or a medical doctor, but not just somebody who's gonna weigh you and take the height, but somebody who, at the end of both evaluations, we need to have a very clear diagnosis. Okay, a very clear diagnosis, and that's particularly true of people who are on the spectrum. It has to be all the tests that every psychologist and every medical doctor, neurologist, or psychiatrist knows how to do. And at the end, there has to be a recommendation with a diagnosis. We take those evaluations and we pass them on at your cost to a translator here. We have a couple of translators that are favorites, that do the best job in terms of doing very professional and particular to the particular profession, and that's very important. Whether you're coming in Aliyah next summer, or you're coming in Aliyah, you're just beginning to think about it, and you're going to come in 2 years, or you're going to come in a year and a half, wherever it is, you need to start with language today. Today, you need to start with language. That means, and people ask, my child is very low functioning. My child is very low functioning, developmentally disabled. How is he or she going to learn Hebrew? Of course, the ability to learn Hebrew is going to differ, according to the developmental level of the person. Almost every residence, vocational training, vocational setting, recreational setting has people who speak English. They may speak with an accent like we speak Hebrew, but they do speak English. But it's very important, whether it's music, whether there are some websites, and I have a list of some websites which I'd be happy to send you. If you, drop me a line at my email address, which will appear at the end. You can drop me a line. I have a couple of websites that have games that you can play in Hebrew. You can go to your local Jewish bookstore and you can get games, you can get books, etc. It is critical that you start to learn Hebrew as soon as you get off. You and your and the child, the son, the daughter, whomever is coming with you with special needs has to hear. And there are different degrees. Some of it is just learning what we call the tzliel, how it sounds, and to be comfortable with that. And some of it is actually knowing how to say things basically. And some of our people are, like the rest of us, are going to learn to speak it better, and some are going to speak it worse. So that is very critical.
Hannah, can we just take a break for a moment, please?
Sure.
For some questions, okay?
Sure.
First and foremost, you spoke about making an appointment with specialists for evaluations. Can you please give some examples? For example, somebody on the spectrum, right. What type of specialist would they need? Let's pick 3 perhaps, although I don't know exactly who's here. Let's say someone who's higher and lower functioning, so really polar right. ends. And perhaps somebody who has, I don't know, something that you see, someone with Down syndrome.
Right. So I just want to say that when the time comes, I will send you a list, but I'm going to address that anyway. In other words, you don't have to memorize everything now, but what you do need, you need a complete battery, a complete psychological battery. And most psychologists, any psychologist knows what that includes. That includes IQ, that includes executive functioning, that includes behavior assessment, that includes language development. Those are the things that they know, and the special testing depending on the age, and some of this depends on the age of the individual. You're talking about adults, but there's special testing for autism. And at the end of that, and all those testing, and it has to be it can't be a summary. Sometimes people send me summaries. They say, And a psychologist writes, and it's justified there, but it won't fly here. It won't get you, we need to do what's demanded of us. So if the government is saying, this is what I need, then we need, Miriam and I, we pass that on to you, and you need to do that and give yourself enough time to do that. At the end of this testing, and it can't be, again, it can't be a summary. Sometimes I get testing, I get a report, and the report says, this is based on a test that was done in 2009. Or the mother reported that Yaakov was younger, that they tested him, they came up with autism. That's not gonna fly. It doesn't mean that it's not, that we don't trust you. It just means they need to know from the psychologist, it has to be signed. And at the end, as in most all psychologicals, it says, these are the recommendations, and this is the diagnosis. It must have those aspects to it. It's the same thing, and whether the child is somebody with Down syndrome or different kinds of developmental disabilities, it has to be a battery like that. And I could send you a list when the time comes of exactly what the tests are. The other is in medical. You need a report from a doctor, whether it's a neurologist, if it's somebody who has mental illness, it should be a psychiatrist. And again, the doctor will know these are they will give you a battery of tests that could be for all of us, and then something particular to that particular issue. And if the person's diagnosis, his profile, her profile has to do with physical disabilities, it's got to be very, very specific what those are, and what medication that person is, and what was the development of this, and what is the prognosis of this. And at the end, just like we did for the psychological, we need to be able to say, the person has, this is the diagnosis, and this is these are my recommendations. If your son or daughter is in a vocational setting, if he or she is already in a residential setting, whatever, we need a letter from those settings, a report about the person's behavior in those settings, about the person getting along socially in those particular settings. So we need basically three things: the psychological and a medical, again, usually a neurologist or a psychiatrist, depending on the profile. And the third thing is, if the person is any kind of setting now, whether it's vocational or recreational or residential, we need a report on the person's behavior and accommodation in this particular setting. Okay.
One second.
Well,
Okay, so if a person has a certain syndrome, I'm just reiterating what you said, or is low functioning autism, they will, and regardless of when their last assessment was, they still need an updated assessment, even though everybody would agree that nothing has changed. Now, do these assessments need to be translated into Hebrew?
Yes, I thought I mentioned that before. We do. Once you send them to me, I look them over and say, this is adequate, this is missing, this is not gonna, we're not gonna be able to proceed with the government, and to get with the placement. And then when I kind of sign off on it, then we send it off to the translator. The translator is in touch with the parent and gives them how much it costs. I forgot to say how to say that in English.
About how much would it cost per page for a translation? Because we know that an evaluation can be many pages depending on a person's needs. About how much would that cost?
It's hard. I can't even begin. There are different translators and they have different costs. I need to look that up exactly, because they do it per word or per group of words. And I have to say that if you send me an evaluation, and sometimes at the end there's an addendum and it has list charts and charts and charts of the numbers. Like, I usually don't even give that to them to translate. In other words, sometimes I'll just translate it generally in Hebrew, just because you don't need to have every detail. So I need to look that up because there are different translators that we've been using, and they have different prices. So I don't want to quote, you know.
So if somebody has an Israeli neighbor who says, "Oh, I'll translate it for you," is that good enough?
It's not good enough. You should thank your Israeli neighbor for that, for trying to help. It's very professional. I couldn't write a medical report. I couldn't write a psychological report in English, my mother tongue. I couldn't do it because it's very, very professional, and it has the lingo of that particular service and that particular specialty. And so we need to have people who really know how to translate it according to the specialty. So it's really not enough. We need specialists who can translate it. So.
Okay. And a couple people actually said how their son or daughter doesn't really speak too much at all.
Right.
Or certainly may be verbal, but doesn't really have a lot of Hebrew, and they don't ever anticipate their child learning Hebrew.
Right. So that's clear. If they can't speak English, they're not going to speak Hebrew. But it may be important if you know your child best. If there's words that they can understand, you know, and some people won't be able to understand, but the words that they can understand, like everyday words like shalom and things like that, then it's best that they learn it. There are always people, but you should be rest assured that there are always people in the residences who give them services that speak English. And we will make sure. We cannot assure you that the house or the home is going to be made up of English-speaking residents. We can't assure you that. But we can try to assure you that there's always somebody in the house, and we won't help place that person. You won't help place them, and not we won't help them. We won't place them. We won't assure the placement in a place where the person's not going to be comfortable, because you want your child to be comfortable, and we want your child to be comfortable. So we will make sure that there are places that have English speakers, but that's very, very prevalent here. That's very, very prevalent here.
I don't want to break your rhythm, so I'm going to do one more question. Okay. Someone asked about how much control as a parent they would have in the program they wish their child to be in, and do they get to have that option of determination, or does the government determine or demand it?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. That really feeds in, that segue into one of the things that I said, that you need the updated evaluations, which we dealt with. We dealt with language, but you have to know that in order for after we do that process, and you need to register in, and I'm going to get to that, we're going to register in the Revacha office, the local social services. So if you decide to live, for example, in Netanya, then we need to go to the office that's closest to your address there. If you live in Jerusalem, there are different offices. If you live in South Jerusalem, you live in North Jerusalem, there are different offices for you to go. So we need to do that. But after that, they take your papers and they will reevaluate your child. Okay, they're going to reevaluate your child unless it's so clear that they feel it's usually very clear, but still they want their own evaluations. Once in a while, they'll skip that. But, and this is what I want you to know, that you need then have a placement committee meeting, and you're there. You're going to represent your child. You're going to be there. If you like, I will accompany you as well, because sometimes it's just easier for somebody who, not just the Hebrew, because they usually understand that also. But this placement committee, let's say you've done the process with Revacha, you have all your papers in, we've given them in, and your son Yaakov has been reevaluated, and then we have a committee meeting. And there's a psychiatrist who's there, and there's a psychologist, and there's a parent representative, somebody like you, who's sitting there to make sure that the rights of your child is being taken care of. And there's usually a social worker, and they're going to say that what they're going to determine at that meeting, and that's the placement committee meeting, and you're going to sit there, and they're going to determine, and they're going to ask you questions, because you're a very important person to them. You are, like I said before, you're the captain of the team. And not only do we need to listen to you, but I've sat on many placement committee meetings, and I have to say that they always have the child's best interest, and they always listen. They always listen to the parent. So when they make a recommendation and they say, based on the paperwork we have and based on our evaluation, we are going to, they're going to now determine zakaut, what your eligibility, what your child is eligible for such and such placement, residential placement. Your child is we recommend and you're eligible for such and such vocational day services, vocational training, what kind of a work situation. And you're going to sit there and say, thank you very much, and that's exactly what he or she needs. Or, I disagree with you, and they're going to listen to you. I disagree with you. I think that my child needs a little bit of more of an open environment. I think my child needs a little bit more of a closed environment. And you're going to sit there and they will listen to you. And you're a very important person in that placement committee and that meeting. You cannot have a committee meeting until you're here and you've gone through the process. So you can't have the placement before you come on Aliyah. So you need to be ready to have your child live with you, for, for a certain period of time. And I'd like to say, in terms of your own responsibilities also as our team leader, that you should make a pilot trip. Even if you have a home in Geula, or you have a home in Beit Shemesh, or you already know where you want to live in Modi'in, you should come, because you need to look at these places with or without your child. And you need to look at we will set up meetings for you to visit, let's say, Aliyah, and we will set up meetings for you to look at Elwyn, and we will set up meetings for you to just have a sense and to be able to say, oh no, that's really too low functioning, or that's not appropriate, or, oh yes, that seems what the right thing. We cannot, and this is very important, if you go to a resident and you say, wow, this is really appropriate for my child, doesn't mean that we can get you a spot there. You know that it's very much determined by what the funding is, where there is a place in that home, etc. So it's very, very important for you to understand that. We will try to lead you away. We will try to make a connection between you and an agency, but we're not allowed to, we won't promise you, because we don't have the capacity to promise you a place in that particular place. But you will come and you will have an idea, an idea of what's appropriate for your family member. I know that there are a lot of questions. There's still some questions, and I'm happy.
I'm holding them. I didn't want you to lose your rhythm. I'm just reviewing, and I'm answering some things that perhaps you've already answered.
Right.
And we'll come back to these questions. Don't worry. Right. I'm really reviewing.
No, I know that. I
don't want Hannah to lose her rhythm. One thing though, Hannah, that you might want to interject now, because a lot of people are asking, is your fee? And if somebody didn't want to use an outside consultant, I can answer that one. But if you wanted to just talk about how you work.
Okay, so if it's okay, can I freeze that? It would be okay with you?
Sure.
If I freeze it, because I have this rhythm, and I'd like to get to that.
Okay, I apologize. Go back. We'll get back to that, everybody.
We spoke about different agencies. Miriam spoke about Bituach Leumi. I spoke about Revacha. I spoke about the different agencies. I want to just talk about two agencies, okay? Just to Bituach Leumi. Bituach Leumi will give you, not 100%, but will give you a stipend depending on earnability, what your child or your family member is able to earn. And that's going to be a certain monthly stipend. They will give you for, let's say, they will give you for mobility, if you need a car or you need to adapt your car because your family member has physical disabilities. So they're going to be able to, they're going to work with you on that. They're going to be able to do that. If you come with a family member, a child, a son or daughter who's very high functioning, okay, and may not be eligible for all the services that Revacha can do. They may apply for what we call shikul, which is rehabilitation. Bitur Leumi will set them up with vocational training and for different services like that. The other agency, which is very important, is the Kupat Cholim, is the medical. Now, when you get off the plane, or on the plane, I don't know how it's done now, but you register for a Kupat Cholim. There are different servers, different Kupat Cholim, different medical services, just like different countries have at this time. And there's Klalit, and there's Mu'uchedet. And what you do is you sign up for that Maccabi, you sign up for that particular service. Now, you should be, before you sign up, like that'll be part of the work, the homework that will help you do. If your son, daughter has a medical condition and you're moving to a particular time, now not sure that your son, daughter is going to be placed there, but that's where you're going to land. That's where you're going to get off the plane, and that's where you're going to go. And you're going to register for a Kupat Cholim. Then we should check out in advance, does that Kupa have the kind of medical services that your particular child needs that's going to meet his or her service? And if your child, if we're talking about somebody who has mental or psychiatric needs, do we need a psychiatrist? So within the Kupat Cholim, within the medical service is what we call Biyut HaNefesh, which is mental health. And they have a psychiatrist and they have social workers, and you need to sign up, another sign up, but we need to be able to do that. And you need to know that that's available to you. So that's something that I wanted to cover. And before we answer the question about fees and other questions, if it's okay with you, I've asked a parent who's done this before. I've asked a parent, we've asked a parent who's done this before, Debbie Schuss. Debbie, can you come on to speak to you about how she went through the process and just to share some of her experiences and some of her
my video is disabled. I don't know if you want.
Debbie, we don't see you.
Because it says the host is disabled my video. Oh, okay, let's try it again. There I am. Okay. Hello.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. There are a number of things as a parent that it's really important to remember, and of course you can steer me so that I can cover what you think is important. I used to come to Israel twice a year. I was very familiar with everything. I never thought that it was a possibility that my son could come on Aliyah with us because he has emotional problems that are not really compatible for him to live independently. So I was very concerned that he wouldn't be able to adjust here. And I came 2 or 3 times, and Hannah took me by the hand and showed me everything that was available. And I was amazed at the variety of programs that are available. Not all of which were in the least bit appropriate for him, but just the professionalism and the degree of caring let me come home from those trips and say, I could do this. And we're here next week or so. I think it'll be 2 years.
Debbie, is it possible for you to move inside? Because the background noise from the wind is a little bit rough.
Yeah, it's not too private, but I'll find a place.
Because I think that anytime that we can hear from up here makes it easier.
I know, just working on privacy more than on sound.
This is better.
Right there is great. Yeah.
Okay, we'll find a place here. This is better. I'll close this door and nobody will hear me. Better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't know if you missed a lot of what I said, but I didn't think it was even going to be possible. I didn't think he could adjust here. I didn't think, my son was in the OHEL system in New York, and I was very familiar with SSI and FSD and this application and that application and all the things you have to do. And I was concerned that not knowing the system, not knowing what was available, how could he possibly adjust in another country where he doesn't speak the language? His Hebrew is still poor. he gets along because he's pretty high functioning, but his Hebrew is still poor. And there was so much help along the way. It was so amazing to see how people are interested in helping and want to help you, want to give you the options that are going to work. My son is very, he would like to think of himself as very Haredi. And I remember we went to one social service agency, I think it was Kidum, Hannah.
Yeah.
And it was it's a secular agency. And the first thing that the administrator of the agency said is, do you want to go to our Haredi chapter? Do you want to really be more comfortable if we talk to someone Haredi? Because they were so interested in him being comfortable and in him getting his needs met in the way that they needed to be met. So it was quite amazing. I'm not sure where you want, what details are important, except that every single piece of paper from every evaluation you ever had has to come with you. And probably get carried around with you from office to office so that you don't miss the one paper that you need when they ask you for it.
Okay.
But that's true on Aliyah in every office.
Could you just talk like a few minutes about the placement, about Naftali's placement and Biyut HaNefesh and those, okay?
Naftali is not under Revacha. He's under Misrad HaBriyut because he has, I'm not sure how the distinction lies, but we were told that he was under Misrad HaBriyut. And we had a placement meeting, as you described, with a parent advocate and a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And we didn't agree on everything, but they were extremely receptive. When I told them what I thought they were wrong about, they listened to me, they asked me questions, and they ultimately agreed with me, which was amazing to me, especially as a veteran of the social service system in New York, where they don't listen to you really. Yeah. And then he went for Shikum, and that was not the Vadat Shikum, that was a different one. He had a committee meeting to get him rehab services, vocational services, and he was assigned a social worker and a madrich, who was basically just to take him around the city, show him things, see what services were available and what might be appropriate for him, and just help him acclimate without having to be accompanied by me or by his father in order to acclimate, especially since, we didn't know which services would be appropriate. We didn't know what services were available. It's like, here is the gym. You like to play basketball? Let's show you the gym. Here is the library. You might want to get English language books. That's where the books are. And it was extremely helpful in getting him acclimated, even though at that time he had to be living with us because he didn't have a residential placement. And when we were in New York, he lived in a supported apartment situation, and he needed that. He needed the independence. So he was placed in, I don't know what would you call it? Here we call it, if we just translate, a supportive community, which really is supported housing. But there are different levels of supported housing, and there was such intense attention paid to what would be the appropriate placement for him. And we went and looked, and we saw different places, and the first placement, which is where he is, because it was perfect, they said, nope, we're not putting him in there until we get him an English-speaking roommate, because he needs to acclimate with an English language roommate. Now he has a Hebrew-speaking roommate. He's fine. They get along. They manage anyway. But there was an extraordinary amount of care and sensitivity to what he might need. What was that question? Guardianship and power of attorney? I don't know anything about
I was answering somebody else. But Debbie, somebody did ask if you could just mention your son's age that he made Aliyah at.
My son is now 39. We made Aliyah when he was 37.
Okay.
And what else would people like to know? I mean, I'd rather, if someone has specific questions. It was a tremendous adjustment for him, but he was very much on board and wanted to do this. which is something that I personally think is crucial. You can't take someone and reorient them if they have no interest in coming with you. It's difficult, but obviously if they don't know what they're getting into, my son spent many years in Israel in yeshiva when he was very young, but it was a very important thing for him to come on Aliyah with us. He was very on board, and it was a difficult adjustment. The difficult adjustment with him first living with us, but at every turn, with Hannah's help, thank you, he was shown what the possibilities were. And that to me is amazing, because I would never have believed that he would be where he is now. He has a job. It's a vocational services shikkum job. Shikkum is rehabilitation. So he has that job through that program. And he goes to yeshiva and learns. That's a private thing that he does. And he's happy. He gets around, he takes the buses, and he's adjusted to being here in a way that if we hadn't experienced the sensitivity to the specifics of his placement, he wouldn't have been that comfortable and that well adjusted.
And someone's asked how long it took for you to find a place for him. And actually, I would add, because of Corona and because today a pilot trip isn't available to, I would say, probably everyone, or certainly most who are watching today, because you must be an Israeli passport holder right now, or have a special occasion with permission from the consulate to get into Israel. If you hadn't been able to see anything prior, how would you have gone about finding a place? What would you have done?
It's a really good question. He didn't come with me on these pilot trips. I went around with Hannah and looked at the possibilities, and we didn't show him the possibilities until later. So I would assume that if there's an availability for people to have virtual tours of the places that they might go and to have interviews with the people who run those places, that would be a somewhat less than adequate substitute, but as good as you're going to get right now under these conditions.
Right. I agree with you 100% that in today's times, we all, for whatever our needs are, need to think as out of the box as possible for a solution to a lot of uncertain problems that can come up. And someone's asked, how long did it take for you to find the placement? And how long was it from the time, perhaps I missed this answer to answer somebody else, how long did it take from the time you arrived until the placement was set in motion?
If you mean the residential placement, that took longer. Within, I would say, probably 2 months or so, we had some programming placements. We had a madrich, we had social worker, we had a psychiatrist. That was within the first few months. And the residential placement was probably more like 8 or 9 months, if I remember correctly.
So he was living at home with you that whole time?
Yes, he was.
That could be very challenging for a lot of people.
It was challenging for us, and it was challenging for him. But it was much more important to us. And obviously this is so individual, because it depends on the level of disability, and it depends on the behavior profile of whoever the individual is that we're talking about. But it was very important for us that the residential placement be as close to appropriate as possible immediately, so that he not reject it, because he's a high functioning verbal person. He's not a person that you can just say, okay, he's low functioning autism and we need the best place, let's find the best place. He needed to be a part of the decision making and a part of he was at the initial placement meeting, which not every disabled individual would be there, because they would not necessarily be expected to contribute. Questions were addressed to him, questions were addressed to me, to my husband, and after my husband or I would answer, all of the representatives at that meeting would turn to him and say, do you agree? And is this what you think? And do you think your parents are right? And we know they have your best interest at heart, but do you agree with them? So we wanted to be really sure about the residential placement before we accepted anything. It's conceivable we could have gotten something else earlier, but if it was not right, it would have been more trouble than getting something and trying it out and having to move to something else.
And the last thing before we go back to Hannah, how's his Hebrew today versus when he first came?
It's better. It's not, he can't carry on a conversation in Hebrew, but that's mostly because of his own anxiety about it. He understands a lot. He gets along. He can ask people for what he needs. He get around the city on a bus, and he can do what he needs to do, but he's uncomfortable with his proficiency, so it's hard for him to speak. But that's his own issue. It's not about, it's part of his own problem that he can't do that. And he's also, as I might have given you the impression, he's a little on the stubborn side and refused to go to an Ulpan, so we couldn't get that to happen. He says soon he'll be ready, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. Hannah, let's go back to you.
Wonderful. Debbie, thank you so much. It was terrific.
Debbie. Thank you, Debbie.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Debbie.
Okay, let's go back to you now. Hannah, we don't have quite as much time as I had originally thought, and I want to make sure that you get to finish your presentation.
I'm pretty much finished. I think that we've covered all the things that I wanted to cover. I'm looking at all my notes here. And again, my goal was to give you an overview with some detail, but that you don't have to remember all the details. You have to understand that there's a team that's here and all the different team members. You don't have to know to name them, but you need to know that you need to do your homework. Your homework is your evaluations. You must take care of the evaluations. A lot of times that becomes very sticky with some parents who don't take care of it in time. You have to take care of the Hebrew language on whatever level we're talking about. You need to be able to, if you can, come on a site visit, God willing for everybody that this should change, and that you will be able, it'll be a good thing for you to come and be your child's advocate here. And you need to, and you will be in attendance at the placement committee meetings. Those are the things that I really wanted you to know. And I wanted you to know you need to be ready, but you don't, if you forget steps along the way, that's okay. That's what I'm here for. That's what Miriam is here for. And I know that I know that Miriam has addressed the issue of guardianship. So I just want to say that there are different states that have different laws in the United States, and I know different countries have different laws. So you need to have whatever guardianship that particular state, that particular country is, whatever is legal. So for example, X number of years ago, the United Nations passed a resolution which was adopted by many states and many countries, and that is that any person, no matter what functioning level, is allowed to be his or her own guardian. Now that's a nice civil rights. That's a nice civil rights statement, but practically that doesn't always work, because your child is not in a position cognitively or physically to be able to make the decisions for his or herself. So what has to happen then is that you need to get power of attorney in particular areas, whether it's body, in other words, taking care of the person's physical body, different kinds of welfare, finances, and those are things that you need to get. You need to assure your Jewish agency representative that you have guardianship. And again, sometimes they don't know what's appropriate in that particular area. When you come here, you need to get guardianship again. It's not transferable from one country to another. You need to get Israeli guardianship. Again, the Israeli guardianship is trying to work in that particular mode as well, but you need to get it. That's done in the ministry of what the legal ministry. What's That's it. How do you say that in English?
Within the court system.
That's it, in the court system. It's done within the court system. You don't usually need a lawyer for that, but sometimes a lawyer can facilitate the process.
One of the reasons that I answered these questions at length, and Hannah's now mentioned it again, is because the state of Israel wants to make sure, which of course is not the situation here today, but that someone isn't just coming and sort of dumping a child here. And somebody said, why do you refer to, who we're talking about as children, because we're talking about adults. But I can just share my child, I have a child who's 36, and he's my child. To other people, he's very respected in his workplace, but he is my little boy. And so I apologize if we've referred to your adult children as children. That's certainly not what is intended. But the state of Israel wants to make sure that nobody is coming and dumping their relative here, their family member here, and then sort of running away, leaving for the state to care for them. The state will not automatically pick up guardianship for a child, for another adult, unless you decide that that's what you want, which I'm not sure that that's what anybody would want, even living in the country of origin where you are today. Somebody said, what do you do as you get older? And my answer was that you would do in Israel whatever you would do still in your country of origin. I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. Again, Hannah, it's been asked about your fee and what if somebody didn't want to use a special consultant. And what I'll just reiterate, what Hannah offers you is true hand-holding, whether that's hand-holding of your paperwork, of guidance, of programs. You might say, we're really hoping to move to Haifa, and my child has X challenge, but we really want to move to Haifa. And Hannah might be the one, because she's so knowledgeable, to say, you might want to live in Haifa, but please know that the best placement for your child is going to be in Beersheba, specifically choosing a place that's far away. And then that's up to you if you want to live closer or further. But something that Hannah does bring to the table is not only the ability to handhold you in a way that Nefesh will not be able, Nefesh b'Nefesh, will not be able to handhold you through every piece of paper or very specifics like that. And Hannah can. And just like you will hire a lawyer for your rental contract or for the purchase of your home, and you'll hire an accountant to help you through, the financial process of your Aliyah, knowing where your money's at, what your budgets are, your investments, whatever that is, your taxes. Hannah is another consultant. And at the end of the day, Hannah and I both know very well that whether your child is 18 or in his 50s, or even 60s perhaps, you've come a long way with that child. Perhaps it started at birth, perhaps it started at another time, perhaps you've joined even about yourself today. But you've gone through a system, regardless of what country you're coming from, you've gone through a system that has had its own challenges and its own obstacles and its own bureaucracy. Putting on top of that the challenge of a new country, and language and bureaucracy, and knowing the ins and outs, not the black and white, but the ins and outs, again, is something that a hired person can offer to hold your hand through. I'm being very honest so that you are aware, and we are transparent so that you can have the best service possible, that Nefesh b'Nefesh will just not be able to give you to that depth. Yes, we will walk you through. And for all of you, I recognize so many of you here who have asked questions. We've emailed and I've given a lot of information. We've had long conversations. But at some point, my ability will stop because I don't know the best program for a person who is low functioning, not toilet trained, not verbal, and who is in his 30s. I don't. There are other specialists out there. After, I don't know, close to 15 years of working together with Hannah, I'm pretty much sold on Hannah's abilities. But that, I am sharing my personal experiences. But that is why Hannah's really given this presentation today. Somebody asked about, is SSDI eligibility evaluation acceptable? I know for children who have certain disabilities, SSDI evaluation is actually not enough. Hannah, I don't know if you can answer that differently.
Well, I've had the same experience. And I just want to answer a related question that some of your children get SSI, they get Social Security in the United States. For a while, it changes here. For a while, it was transferable. In other words, you can get Bituach Leumi and keep your SSI. I know that it was questioned at a certain point. I really don't know today, August 2nd, what the status is, but those are things that we might check out, before you actually come, when it's closer to the date of your coming.
Is there a special needs initial application form for an adult child for Aliyah? No. You, as the parent, will fill that application out. You can say on behalf of, and that's not a problem. Are there English support groups for parents of teens with high functioning, who are high functioning on the spectrum? Yes, there are. There are so many support groups, virtual support groups out there today, mostly on Facebook.
And if I could just add to that, to Miriam, is that just like you had an opportunity to hear from Debbie tonight, Debbie Schuss, who went through the process with a son who has, mental illness, psychiatric issues, that if you would like to speak to somebody who has a child who has similar challenges to yours, I usually try to make the connection, because it's also often very helpful for you to hear from somebody else and to have somebody to speak to.
We don't have too much more time. Somebody asked about healthcare and a child who's over 18. Everybody in Israel has the eligibility for healthcare, regardless of age, regardless of any pre-existing condition. It's a law in Israel that everybody is part of the healthcare system. It is under the umbrella of the National Insurance Institute. On the sidebar, my coworker, Sarah Cantor, had put up a bunch of links. I know that they are sort of like in one shot there, but they are there for you. So your child coming over the age of 18 will be entitled to his own health care without any problems whatsoever. There's no such thing as not being eligible for health care. How much medication should you bring with you? One of the things that's on that sidebar is the link to the drug registry in Israel, by the way, so that you can look into your medication. Although you should not take that as a given, you should always check with a liaison from the healthcare provider that you're going to choose regarding the medication and coverage. That just tells you that it's available in Israel. You should bring 2 to 3 months medication with you if possible. And this is mostly so that you can give yourself time to be settled before running around finding the appropriate doctor to give you your medication. It could be that today your family doctor issues you the prescription for something that another specialist would really be responsible for that medication. And that's not true in Israel. Here, it's most often that the specialist needs to issue that prescription, and it could take some time until not only that you're settled, but you get that appointment with the specialist. The placement committee will take all of your child's needs into account when it comes to placement. When it comes to placement in a vocational program, if your child has more than one challenge, there could be an emotional challenge along with a learning challenge, along with something else, and all of that, his holistic self will be taken into account.
Can I just interrupt for a second or add to what you're saying? I just want to fine tune something, and that is that most often, and I'm saying it that way, when you make Aliyah and you're here, then the placement, a vocational placement or a day placement can be done very soon after you come. Sometimes the agency will charge you for it until the money, until the funding from the government kicks in. But even if your child has to live with you, he or she can go to a day program or a vocational program while you're waiting out the resident. We're getting a residential placement.
A couple people said how perhaps their insurance won't cover them in the States and they would like to have their evaluations done in Israel. Hannah, my opinion would be that it will only delay the process further.
Absolutely.
And you don't want someone to say, oh, your son might be behaving this way because he's in a new country. We always want to be evaluated based on the surrounding that's natural to us. And please God, living in Israel will be natural, but it won't be at the time of evaluation. And I certainly recognize and appreciate the fact that it can be quite costly. And you know what? It's actually quite costly in Israel as well. It's not something that's inexpensive.
Right.
I would like to reiterate that I really appreciate the fact that by uprooting someone with any special need, regardless of what it is, who has been successful in the program that they are, is really like taking both feet off of a cliff and not knowing what's at the bottom. You might see something that looks like land, but it might be quicksand. It might look like water, but it might just be a pond. And it is very scary. And the more research that you can do, networking with other families, with someone with a very similar disability, so that it gives you the security, will help you take steps towards a solid and more secure decision. Can you make the best decisions from 6,000 miles away? It's hard to make the best decisions. And so what wasn't asked is, what if somebody made a wrong decision? What if somebody thought that a program, I'm just going to throw out a name, Feuerstein was the best program, when it turned out that, again, I'm just throwing out a name, Siach Sod would have been a better program. So there's ways to work. You're not locked in, but you can, you can't see me digging in my heart. And that's the same with a typical child, that you made a decision of a school, of a city, because you thought it was best. And then once you experience by living, it turns out that perhaps you could have done better. And that's what I hope that you can walk away with, is with some information. And I realize that it's overwhelming and it's a lot of information. And that's why the recording is going to be sent to you. But I encourage you to make the best decision that you're able to make at this time. And if that decision needs to be tweaked after being here for a few months, then that will have to be. And it's not something to feel bad about. It's something to feel good that you were able to get as far as you can, especially given Corona. I know I'm going to repeat this question because I also emailed with this person, Hannah, someone who has a daughter, an adult daughter with Down syndrome, who's also hearing impaired. And she's very, very concerned about communication devices. I've sent her a lot of different resources, but perhaps that's something that you'd like to weigh in on. I'm being given 5 minutes to wrap it up, and I realize that we still have some questions open. So Hannah, and for the person who asked, I apologize that I'm going to ask Hannah to make this a shorter than longer answer.
Right, but your child is not, there are a lot of people who have a hearing impairment who have dual diagnoses or multiple diagnoses. So a lot of the agencies are geared for that. I'm thinking about a young woman who made Aliyah with her family maybe 15 years ago. She's close to 50 now. She has hearing impairment. She lives in a wonderful residence, and she has Williams syndrome and hearing impairment, and they accommodate that to the hearing impairment as well as the cognitive impairment. So again, that's like any other dual diagnosis or multiple diagnosis. It's dealt with on an individual level, and there are agencies here that take care of it, and there are agencies for the hearing impaired. So we make a combination and we work it out.
Okay, we are going to wrap it up. Will the links in the chat be in the replay or otherwise be made available later? Yes. And my email is, again, either you could ask questions to Hannah, whose email is listed here. My email is mnaiman@nbn.org.il, or you can direct your questions to Aliyah, ALIYAH, @nbn.org.il. Perhaps some of you are saying, you know, she didn't answer me when I wrote to her, but I knew that this was coming, and that is why your email was not answered in full. And now that you have a little bit more exposure and some information, I look forward to hearing from you. It's been really a very full webinar. I thank everyone for joining us. Someone's just asking, is there really any advantage to doing anything ahead of actually arriving before coming to Israel? Everything.
Right.
Yes. Again, we can't reiterate enough, and Hannah, I hope it's okay that I'm saying we. You must come with an evaluation that is current within 6 months of your Aliyah. If you decide not to, which is certainly your right, know that you have delayed your son or daughter's placement by many months. And again, it is not something that's inexpensive here for Israelis or for anyone. It's not an inexpensive process. I realize that it's not inexpensive either in your country of origin. Here, Debbie Schuss, who joined us earlier, agrees. Everything that you can do prior to arrival is something that you should in fact do. I thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for your time. Debbie, thank you for your time and sharing your personal experience. And we certainly look forward to hearing from you and welcoming you home. Have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you very much. That's it.